From this point forward, I'm going to be changing my approach to this analysis to focus just on the most exceptional or easily missable great scenes from this show, as opposed to tackling every single scene as it comes. At this point, if I haven't sold you on Log Horizon being a great series, I probably am not going to. And truthfully, the main reason I even want to continue this series at all, besides lauding every single noteworthy thing that the show does, is to eventually prove why Season 2 is damn nearly just as good as Season 1. Log Horizon has been given plenty of credit for its biggest wham moments, like the one which rounds out this arc in episode 10. It's only the fact that there are other scenes which are less obvious but in my mind just as incredible, which leads me to continue this chronological approach to my analysis. Episode 8, for instance, contains one of the most nuanced and interesting portrayals of bartering that I've ever seen in anime, and one which uses masterful visual editing to maintain engagement. Marielle and Henrietta are meeting up with the leader of the third biggest merchant guild in Akiba to discuss trade agreements. At first, not even the viewer is privy to the ladies' real intentions, but as we start to dive into their thoughts, as represented in little stand-esque ghosts appearing behind them, we can tell that something bigger is afoot. Everyone in the scene is maintaining a poker face, so diving into their inner thoughts adds a ton of emotional intrigue to the situation, and the use of these ghosts allows us to feel those emotions without ever breaking away from the tension of the actual standoff. Split-screen shots emphasizing the eye contact, behavioral shifts over the course of the conversation, and the constant impression that the merchant is being strung along by these friendly ladies right up until they back him into a corner gives the entire conversation a rising tension. Moreover, the interesting patterns on the floor and walls and the weird rotating centerpiece table give your eyes somewhere to wander away from the occasional static shot and appreciate. Even outside shots of the building are surprisingly memorable. It must have been paramount in the director's mind that this scene run its course without any hard cutaways or tension dispersals so that the impact of the merchant's distress would come through properly in the end. So when we flash back to Shiroe's explanation of how to handle the negotiations, we transition by a pair of match cuts fading into one another, giving the impression that we've never really left Marielle's mind, even though we entered a completely different setting and time for a brief stint. This whole scene manages cuteness, cleverness, fun, tension, and cunning, all in just a conversation about relatively low-level business dealings, because the show wants us to understand how the consequences of these simple dealings are far-reaching, and all of the characters involved are well aware of it. In the long run, this deal is going to benefit everyone, but it can't necessarily come about as a result of everyone getting what they want in the way they want. Compromises have to be reached, and the upper hand goes to whomever has thought the farthest ahead. You could even say it's a miniature version of what's to come in episode 9 and 10. From there, the episode transitions into finally giving us the full scope on what Toru and Minori have been up to all this time. But the one thing I need to point out is this simple shot of Toru bouncing around and enjoying himself while Minori looks utterly devastated. Watching the series for the first time, you'd probably just take this as an indication that Toru has a more adventurous or carefree personality and is more excited at the possibilities of life in this world than his sister. And sure, that's not an unfair characterization, but the truth is that Toru had been in a wheelchair for the last few years after an accident which killed his prospects as a soccer player, and so there is much more depth to his excitement than meets the eye. There's a visual hint towards this in Season 1, but considering that this shit isn't properly revealed until deep into Season 2, it may very well be the most mind-blowing call forward in the entire show. Really though, this cutaway to the kids was mostly important to this particular episode in how it breaks up two lengthy conversation scenes in the same location. Its inclusion justified by the fact that we know there to be a break where the three original conversants are waiting for the other two merchant guild leaders to arrive, giving the whole episode a continued sense of happening in real time, even through the cutaways to other characters. As the conversation resumes, the conceit of using purple ghost images gets taken to new and hilarious places, with characters' consciousness apparently resting dejected on their own shoulders, or in my favorite case, Henrietta's inner face forebodingly pacing about, staring down her conversational combatants as though looking for chinks in their emotional armor. One of Log Horizon's chief specialties is how it finds the most appropriate moments to feed us new information about the setting. For instance, it's easy to imagine another show having errantly taught us about all of the biggest guilds in the city in an earlier episode just for the sake of foreshadowing their relevance later. But in this case, we learn about all the big guilds as their leaders meet up for the roundtable discussion. Instead of separate scenes introducing the guilds en masse and then introducing their leaders again here, it happens all at once. And yet, since the show has done such a careful job of using many of these characters in previous scenes, such as the smaller guild leaders in the meeting of the small guilds, the merchant leaders in the previous episode's meeting, and tons of foreshadowing of the bigger combat guild leaders, it doesn't feel overwhelming when such a huge load of now relevant characters are suddenly introduced. And yet, even still, there are a couple of new faces in there to learn about. The first half of episode 9 is interesting in how it all builds up to a paradigm shift in the conversation. As I've explained before, I don't think it was necessarily meant to be a secret to the viewer that Shiroi had already bought the guild building. In fact, cutting away to the kids setting their plan into motion seems like it was meant to confirm this for us long before Shiroi even reveals it to the council. Instead, it's more about creating a situation in which we can realize every single reason that a plan such as this was necessary. If Shiroi had not figured out that he could buy the guild building, then the enormous number of complaints and borderline threats from the other guild leaders would have shut down any discussion and led to a power struggle of intentions between everyone. This is why it's perfect that right at the moment when the most damning thought at the center of everyone's mind finally comes out of Krusty's mouth, that they just straight up won't be able to do anything effectively by force of intentions, Shiroi gives him the hand and lays down the game-changing information that turns this from a conversation about pursuing ideals into a conversation about managing the power that is already at their disposal. The more we learn of Shiroi's plan, the more it becomes apparent that the logic behind it is couched in examining the basic emotional foundation behind the formation of both an economy and, in turn, a society. When the merchants ask him if he really needed to charge them 5 million gold for the Crescent Moon recipe, given its simplicity, he simply asks, "What makes you think this isn't worth 5 million?" This is of course because worth is entirely subjective. It is ascribed to an object on the basis of what is agreeable to both parties in a transaction. Just as a $20 t-shirt can suddenly be worth more if it has the right signature on it, for instance, or a game console can fail to sell because its production cost requires the company to charge more for it than gamers are willing to pay for the product, worth is always a tug of war between two parties. For Shiroi, letting the other guild leaders in on the secret of how to make food at this particular point in time was only worthwhile in any way because it meant he could go through with his plan to buy the guild hall. For the merchant guilds, the sky's the limit on what they can now do to build an economy now that they understand how to create products which customers will seek. They can't even realize yet how his use of that money in establishing a system of governance in the city will lend that much greater credence to the viability of that economy. In the end, everyone wins, but only after Shiroi's danced the most careful tripwire of using arguably abusive authoritarian measures for the sake of what in the end he will hope to be a very minimal libertarian government. Episode 10 is another one of those uber-dense ones which seems to effortlessly move the story in leaps and bounds forward at a natural and casual pace. Before we even see the rest of the roundtable discussion, we get to see the results, the establishment of a thriving marketplace in the middle of town. Returning to this episode, it's delightful to think of just how minimal these early food stands are in comparison to how lively the town is going to get by the end of the season. Watching its evolution and feeling how the plan comes to fruition over the course of the series is one of the most satisfying parts of watching it. If any of this show's thematic intentions were not yet understood by the viewer at this point, episode 10 takes the opportunity to take all of its background suggestions about the problems in this world and what can be done to prevent them, and finally bring it all to the forefront. Shiroi's plan is simple: ban player killing in lower level areas, entrapment of players, and cruelty to the people of the land. It's here that we can start to recognize the way the people of the land will be used as a metaphor for people of another race, particularly of a comparably less advantaged nation. Just take any of the Black Knight guild leaders' quips about how they aren't people, and imagine instead of they, he's referring to the people of an existing race, and then consider how the argument is made for why the people of the land are no different from any other human. It reads sort of like a rebuff of racist ideas which have existed in our own past, or still among bigoted thinkers today. I am also going to continue to posit the idea that the people of the land are specifically a metaphor for third world nations because of how they are used within the show's economy as early as this episode, with a merchant guild leader suggesting that they hire the people of the land to handle the adventurers' paperwork because they can be hired for cheaper than adventurers can. This is the same reason that jobs are outsourced to third world nations or given to immigrants in first world nations, because those people straight up place less value on their time and personal freedom than people who are used to more expensive standards of living, and they may not even have as much of a concept of their own ability to aspire towards a different lifestyle, either because of their current social structure or simply because they do not have the powerful privileges granted to adventurers, which leave them no reason to acquiesce to the demands of social pressure. I think it's important to note as well, while we're on this scene, exactly who the adventurers present are as people. Everyone here is an intelligent and reasonable adult. In fact, I would wager that part of Shiroway's decision-making on who to invite was not simply guild size, but his personal ability to vouch for these individuals. Being the head of a massive guild at all would likely require a certain level of prowess in itself, and it would do him no favors to leave any of the biggest ones out. But his representatives for the smaller guilds are not coincidentally the ones who were the most reasonable about the previous meeting of small guilds, as Mariel no doubt communicated to Shiroway. Some of these people are well learned and calculating, others are more straightforward but with a clear understanding of what they want, or at least a strong sense of morals. Still, none of them are politicians per se. None are stuffy, bureaucratic, or overly proper in their approach. Shiroway is not afraid to refer to Mariel as Mary Nay, and the sheer doubt in the ability to actually even apply rules to what is essentially just a rowdy bunch of gamers is floated by even the most calculating and intense person at the table, namely Krusty. I point this out because when we learn how the secret of this world is, as Mariel puts it, that there is no secret, that operating as you would in real life is how you make things work here, it becomes obvious that the core thought experiment this show is meant to explore is simply how can we build a functional society in a world in which basic needs are inherently met. And yet, a deliberate effort has been made to fixate on a group of people who would not be inclined to attempt to recreate an exact facsimile of the world they came from. The author has chosen to build a society around a subset of people who would consider personal freedom and expression to be an absolutely core necessity of their society without question. Shiroway is played up as a massive villain for even daring to push against the line into authoritarianism, and even the closest thing that this world is going to form to a government of any kind is kept about as small as it could possibly be. It's almost ironic that, as small as it is, author Mamoru Tono had the characters create a taxation system, considering that he was infamously placed on house arrest and sued by the government for years of massive tax evasion. Yeah, it's not exactly difficult for me to read all this hardcore libertarian messaging into the show, when, aside from his previous work Mao Yu having already been a treatise on economics, and this story paying lip service to an essay from an outright controversially libertarian programmer, the author of the damn book series has been in trouble for his difficulties playing nice with authority. As an aside, Log Horizon once more takes every opportunity to crowbar foreshadowing and relevant details into its conversations through the use of the merchant guilds having built a rudimentary steam engine as their example of the far-reaching implications of being able to build things which didn't exist within Eldertale. Aside from the fact that it's a reminder of just what kind of people tend to play MMORPGs, i.e. nerds and especially engineering students, the steam engine itself is going to be a big deal going forward, with major scenes set atop both a boat and a train over the course of the next 2 seasons, and this technology fundamentally altering the way that players interact with the world of Eldertale going forward. And once again, all of this is accomplished in the first half of the episode, while still squeezing in countless cute and inventive details about the world and characters. Seeing the actual steam engine and realizing that it was created using the unique elements of this game world, such as monsters which emit fire, learning Henrietta's real name and her feelings about having it used, the Crescent Moon Guild having to upgrade their headquarters because of the strong impression that they left on all the young prisoners they freed in the last episode, which is low-key setting up for the coming arc where they will be training all of these low-level players. And then before we even make it to the eye catch, we're already learning about the people of the land sending military spies into Akiba. And that's all in the same stretch of episode, which also contains one of the most rousingly emotional and memorable scenes in the series with the formal establishment of the Round Table. Folks, this is why I give Log Horizon a 10 out of 10. The second half of the episode is a lot more relaxed than the first, and contains many of the type of scenes which tend to draw ire from the people with a lower opinion of this show than myself, at least going by my video comments. Personally, I not only welcome these more lighthearted scenes, but consider them to be integral to the show's overall message and ability to even communicate the success of what the characters are trying to do. After all, as Akatsuki puts it, there's nothing better than curry under the moonlight. In the same way that every war is fought in the name of protecting peace, what our adventurers are trying to do in Akiba is to generally improve life in every facet. But living a good life is not necessarily complicated. In fact, it could be said that the purpose of creating complex systems which are able to run smoothly is so that every person's experience can be more fulfilling without having to exert more effort or time in service of making it that way. Foundational to human society in real life was the fact that a single farmer could generate enough crop to feed far more than merely himself, freeing his village up to use the time which they would have had to spend hunting and gathering every day on other ventures which also could improve the well-being of the rest of the village in turn. Society is all about figuring out how to work as smart as possible so that as much time as possible can be dedicated to the pursuit of happiness. And happiness for most people comes in the form of relaxation, communion, and fun. So it does indeed matter that Log Horizon shows us what fun is like for the people in its world. At first, these moments tend to be humble, simple get-togethers in guild halls, eating curry under the moonlight with friends, now without the previous weight which rested on their minds knowing of the continued injustice in their community. Later, there will be full-blown events of increasing escalation, better technology, more robust hobbies, and deeper possibilities for social interaction. Everything that is built in the serious badass scenes has its payoff in the laid-back scenes, and those are what give the narrative meaning and depth. Even still, between hilariously out-of-left-field comedy scenes like Felix of the Black Knights having his summoners use undines to flood clean the Log Horizon headquarters and Shiroe geeking out about his love of curry, we are still reminded of kinks in the system that need to be ironed out, such as the arbitrariness of cost for goods and services in a world where the systems of supply and demand are completely different from real life. And we also get to follow through on the closure of this particular arc of Shiroe's character development, when he fully steps into the role of Guildmaster by accepting his first truly new faces in the form of Toru and Minori. And even further foreshadowing of soon-to-be important characters, such as an eccentric low-level magician voiced hilariously by Jun Fukuyama with his ever-welcome English pronunciations, and a gorgeous People of the Land princess. In the next video, I will most likely be tackling the entire rest of the first season, continuing in this more broadly truncated manner. Be sure to subscribe for more, and pledge to my Patreon if you want to help to make it happen. And if you want an endless stream of Digibro content, make sure to scroll through my every video featuring Digibro playlist, as I appear on a multitude of channels all over this website. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.